they offer food from Bologna for a very cheap price. So they're student oriented or young people oriented. So my father wouldn't eat tortellini in a paper box, but I would because it spares me 15 euros. So I think it's a good exchange. So I think in Bologna we have a lot for young people right now.
Ciao! Welcome to the next generation with me, your host, George Michael Grima. Join me as we explore the Italian food and wine scene through the eyes of young individuals with fantastic experiences to share. Alright, let's go! Hi everyone, welcome to the next generation on the Italian Wine Podcast. You might recognize a new voice because this is George Michael Grima, your new host for the next generation. I'm so excited for my very first podcast and more importantly, my very first guest on the interview, which is Ludovica Colombo, a close friend of mine from BBS, where we studied together doing our masters over the past year. So I am so excited to introduce her. So as I said, she is a digital marketing master student, and now she is also a working professional, working at Web Ranking here in Italy. She has lived the majority of her life in Bologna, but has also traveled quite a bit, going from one country to the other, and is a really great fan of local cuisines, but also exploring new cuisines. But of course, she will tell us all about this and more. So, hi, Ludovica, how are you?
Hi, thanks, George. As George said, we're close friends from our studies, and I'm very excited to be here as well. Can't wait to answer all of your questions.
Yeah, of course, I'm so excited. All right, so just to start us off, can you introduce us a little bit yourself? So, what have you done all your life? What are you doing now? What, is your relationship to food and wine, especially here in Italy?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, my name is Ludovica. I'm 27 and I'm Italian. I was born in Bologna, but I've always been a passionate traveler. Like, I started traveling at a very young age, thanks to my parents. At university, I studied translation, and this love for languages and culture has taken me to several different countries around the world. I've lived in Northern Ireland, in Germany, in Vienna, in Lisbon, in Barcelona. I've been traveling quite a lot. And as you said, like I came back to Italy 1 year and a half ago, and now I work in SEO for this big Italian agency. And my job still allows me to use not only Italians but also other languages that I speak, like German, English, French, Portuguese, with all my clients. Outside of my career, I'm involved in the local community here in Bologna, both for what concern, for example, volunteer work. I'm involved with refugees, people in need, but I also love life in general. So I'm a foodie. I like to hang out. I like hanging out with my friends, trying new food, trying new cuisine. And I'm also part of an Afrobeat dance crew. So quite a full life.
Yeah, it's a really colorful life. You're really busy with a lot of different things. And I feel that really gives you a unique perspective, especially on the food scene, coming from all these different places that you've lived in. And also, I can imagine that you've tasted a lot of different wines from all of these different places as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, one of the things which struck me when I arrived both in Germany and in Vienna, it's that those like I was living in Würzburg in Germany, and there's a huge wine scenery. Like, is one of the places where they produce the most wine in Germany, and it's exported all over the world. And both in Germany and in Austria, I was living close to vineyards. Like when I opened my window, I could see literally grapes, and it was so cool. And I also had no idea that they also produce such good wines in Germany and Austria. Of course, it's completely different from Italian ones. For example, in Bavaria, in Germany, they produce like a frozen wine, so you don't have to expect something like the typical Italian white wine. But I had the chance to try very different things. And for example, I also have a lot of contacts to Middle East and Africa, and I also tried palm wine, which I think would
Okay.
give a headache to Italians, but it's a thing. Like they really drink it, so and it's not bad. Like you don't have to think it's wine, but it's something very typical.
Yeah, but no, that's what's so fun about the wine scene. Not only in Italy, we have such a diverse wine scene, throughout all of the regions. Each region has its own specialty, has its own, typical wine. But then even if you go outside of Italy, it's a whole new world. Every country has its own thing that they do for wine, whether it's rice wine towards Asia, towards Japan, or whether it's palm wine, like you're saying now, or frozen wine. There's so many different things, and that's why we love the wine scene because it's so diverse. Okay, now let's reel it back a bit and start, okay, from where it all started, so to speak. So Bologna is often described as the food capital of Italy. It's where not only a bunch of tourists but also a bunch of Italians come here to taste the cuisine. How would you describe it, as a person that's lived here and grown up here? How would you describe the Bolognese cuisine?
I think until maybe 10 to 15 years ago, the food in Bologna was not what tourists were looking for when coming from abroad. Like, I always thought the equivalent of the German bratwurst would be the pizza or pasta carbonara, something like that, like those evergreens that everybody coming to Italy is looking for. But I think around like 15 to 10 years ago, people started to have an interest toward the cuisine in Bologna. Like, of course, lasagna or bolognese sauce were already very famous. But I think there's so much more in our cuisine here. I think the most famous ones, as we said, is like ragu or lasagna or mortadella. But we have a very wide range of fresh pasta. So as the first dishes, we have tortellini, tagliatelle, balanzoni, which nobody knows. They're like filled pasta filled with ricotta cheese and mortadella, and they're served with Parmigiano creams. Yeah, then
Ooh,
we
that
have,
sounds delicious.
yeah, they're so good. I mean, I would eat them in winter, but they're so good. Then we have tortelloni, which are always filled with ricotta cheese and spinach. So these are the first courses. Then you have the so-called secondi, so second courses, and you find cotoletta alla bolognese, which is a different type of cutlet, and you have like bollito misto, which is literally boiled meat in a broth. And also very typical from here, you have the meatballs with a special tomato sauce. And we're not real fans of dessert, but we have a special chocolate cake, which is very typical. And my grandma used to make like a cake made of rice. It's called torta di riso, which is so good. So I think the cuisine from Bologna is much more varied than we would think.
On the note, you mentioned something which I find very sweet, and I find, that's something that I can only ask you, a person who grew up here. You mentioned your nonna, how she used to bake this, this specific torta de riso. So, growing up, are there any other foods, for example, that the tourists don't see or that you just don't see in restaurants, in public, that maybe you grew up with, or, that your friends grew up with, like local foods of Bologna?
This is a hard question. I think is more about the cake because you wouldn't eat a slice of cake after lunch or dinner. I think it's something maybe
Yeah, I would, of course,
maybe
you
you
know me,
would.
but yeah.
It's more something that you would eat in the morning or in the coffee break, like merenda, as we say in Italian. So these for sure. Then we have other types of cakes like crostata filled with jam. For sure, there's one dish which nobody knows, also in Bologna, many
Ooh,
times.
a secret.
It's
Okay.
it's called zuppa imperiale, which literally means like emperor
Imperial
soup,
soup. Yeah.
something like that. And it's a broth with cubes, like cubes made of fresh dough. I know it doesn't sound very good if I explain it like this, but you have to try it because it's so good. And if the broth is good, is one of the best things you could eat in winter.
Yeah. It takes on the flavor of everything, I can imagine. Like the little pieces of dough are nice and chewy and doughy, but then it takes on the flavor of the broth. What is the broth usually flavored with? Is it a type of meat or mostly vegetables?
Okay, it takes a lot. You have to consider 2 days to do the proper broth.
Oh, wow.
So you put different types of meat inside. Normally is some chicken, some beef. This may sound disgusting, but also the tongue of the
Okay.
poor cow.
Oh, I mean, you use
And
it all up, so might as well.
so, and you let it boil for like 6, 7 hours with also a bunch of vegetables like carrots, onions, many things. And once it's done, you have to leave it outside in the cold, or if it's not cold outside in the fridge overnight, so that like all the fat of the broth will be floating on top,
Oh, okay.
and in the end you have to take the fat out of the broth to make it a bit less fat, yes.
Lighter.
Yeah, a bit lighter.
Oh, that's so interesting. Then obviously, considering the whole process that you described, it's quite understandable that you wouldn't find something like this in a restaurant because, restaurants are not gonna spend 2 days making something and have it fresh every day.
No, I think no restaurant would take the fat part of the broth. I think it's something that housewives do, like, or my mother, my grandmother, not even me.
That's so interesting, though. It's a really particular dish, and that was something, that I was looking for, something that you will never see anywhere. So thank you for that. So, moving on to something else. You've already described it somewhat, but I would really like to go deeper into it. So, you've lived here at least, for 20, 25 years, you've been traveling. But growing up, have you seen the food scene changing over the years? So, there's always been the traditional food, but even in terms of maybe new restaurants that have opened or, what people are eating in their day to day.
15 to 20 years ago, I think Bologna, there weren't so many tourists or internationals as now. So I think the food scene was a bit more dedicated to people from here. So there were less restaurants, less cafes. Of course, we were less, so we didn't need as many restaurants as we have now. And it was more concentrated on Italian cuisine from Bologna. So I think now the scene is much more varied. You can find almost food from anywhere. Of course, if you go to Milan or Rome, you can find so much more. But Bologna is still a small city, and I think it offers a lot in terms of food, which is also not Italian food. And this was not the case, I think, 10 to 15 years ago. And also concerning food from here, I think it has become so crowded with restaurants and stuff like that. And also, there was recently this Italian journalist who writes for the New York Times. I don't know if you read recently, but she wrote a huge attack to Bologna,
Oh my
saying
God.
it was, yeah, I'll spill the tea. She wrote that Bologna is literally the like hell of mortadella eaters, and nobody cares about culture anymore, and it's just restaurants selling and selling and selling. And for me, it's not so true. Like, still Bologna, we have a big university, we have so many things to do, museums, cultural events. I think it was a bit dramatic. It's true that the food industry has grown a lot in the past few years, but she was very sharp on it. And I partially don't agree. I mean, I know that we're very concentrated on food, and you can see charcuterie platters in any corner nowadays. But there's still so much to do. Like, we have open air cinemas, we have cultural events, we have museums, university, conferences. I think in Bologna you can find anything you want. So
Yeah, I feel like, maybe she's saying that because it's such a small place as well. The center is quite small. Living there, I know it firsthand.
yeah.
And, the more places that open, maybe that's why she thinks it. But it's just become more and more concentrated. There are just more places within such a small space.
Yeah, it's just so crowded. Like, I think that's what she meant, and she was very nostalgic about the real, authentic Italian cuisine that we had like 20 years ago. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Of course, it has changed a lot, and even you in your life have changed from being a younger student then to a university student, and we all know what that entails, being out all day, going from one lecture to another, especially if it's during your bachelor's, eating maybe not the best food, or drinking maybe not the most expensive wine. But I think it would be fun if you could maybe run us through kind of what would be the usual day, or a usual weekday when you have lectures, when you're out, and when then at the very at the end of the day you're out partying or out drinking. What will that look like in terms of food, in terms of wine maybe, or in terms of what you're drinking throughout the day, stuff like that? Like, what will that look like?
I think when it comes to students, as you said, it really depends on budget, but there are areas in Bologna which are, let's say, dedicated to students in which you could find something to eat for relatively little money. Many students normally have breakfast at home with something very fast, like coffee and some biscuits, but then I think it's very common to go out to drink a coffee in the coffee break. Like, I think it's something typical both for students and also for employees who find themselves in the city center. For example, bank employees, stuff like that. They just go out around 10:30 and take a coffee or cappuccino at the cafe. And then for lunch, I think students mainly bring lunch from home. We call it schiscetta. It's like a packed lunch, and or you can also take some takeaway food from the university area, where you can find ethnic food like Syrian, Indian, kebab, but also more traditional or healthy options like piadina or vegan food. And after classes, I would say it's so common to have an aperitivo with your friends. You know it very well,
Yep,
first-hand
yep, yep.
experience. Around like 6:30, we just stop at the nearest bar to have a drink with friends, for example an aperol spritz or a glass of wine. We love it for aperitivo, and normally we also take advantage of this drink time to also have some snacks like focaccia slices, small pizzas, or also cheese and charcuterie platters if we want to really properly eat something. And I think normally during the week you would eat home for dinner because you take more time to cook and have like a proper meal after rushing the whole day. But on the contrary, in the weekends, people are more focused on drinking than eating, and there's like a strong drinking culture, I think, in Italy, but drinking for enjoyment. Like, what really was a cultural shock for me when I arrived in Germany or Austria, and I also met people, for example, from Sweden, Norway, is that sometimes they drink because they want to get high. I don't know how to explain that,
For
but
the just for the rush of it.
yeah, exactly. But I think in Italy, normally you drink to enjoy it. Like, you just sit there with your small glass, which is like maybe three sips of wine, but you make it last like 1 hour to chat, to have some time with your friends. So I think it's a different concept of drinking. Of course, we also drink for the rush of it, but it's less frequent. Like, we also enjoy doing it, and I think it's very nice. So yeah, I think the main difference is this one. And also, like, for example, my boyfriend is a chef, and there's so many restaurants now which also is restaurant, they offer food from Bologna for a very cheap price, so they're student oriented or young people oriented. So my father wouldn't eat tortellini in a paper box, but I would because it spares me 15 euros. So I think it's a good exchange. So I think in Bologna we have a lot for young people right now.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I agree as well because, being there, I really got to taste the local cuisine, almost on a daily basis, even from what was available in the grocery store that I was able to cook myself. I think it's really accessible. And, with Bologna, which with it being such a student city, I think it makes the industry in general a lot more approachable. The students are there knowing that it's the, so to speak, the food capital of Italy, and seeing a restaurant on every corner, seeing a cafe, seeing somewhere you can buy food on every corner. So I think it's more easy to get into it, whether as a chef, whether as a server. On that note though, do you think, for example, even if not in Bologna, but outside of Italy or throughout Italy in other cities, in other bigger cities. Do you think something can be done to attract more students and more people of a young age from the Gen Z or even younger to the food and wine industry?
For sure, sometimes, especially in bigger city, as I said, like Milan or Turin or Venice, Florence, those big cities with a lot of tourists, the food industry can look a bit too much for us because we don't have the money, like we don't have the money to approach it. Like as customers, sometimes it can be hard to approach those nice, bougie, fancy restaurants with good wines, good food. So I think one thing about Bologna that everybody likes is that there's something for every pocket. So any type of budget that you have, you can find something that you like and you that you enjoy. So for sure, it's not easy for young people to really take advantage and enjoy the real food industry. On the other side, concerning people working in it, I think normally as students, we normally take part-time jobs as waiters or cashiers in cafes. So we don't consider it a real job, like a real well-paid job in which you can have a career and also have, I don't know, like a family with it. Like is more of a ritual you have to pass through just to make it through your studies and have some spare money to spend for your holidays and stuff like that. So I think it's more of a side job for us. Maybe this doesn't apply to the chef. Like if you want to be a cook, like a professional chef, there's a school for it. And it can be more rewarding also because salaries are higher. But despite all of this, I think is a very stressful industry. Like it's very hard to be in it. You have to be so patient, so motivated. And as I said, my boyfriend is a chef, and that's very tiring. Like you have to work in the weekends. You have to work in the times where in which everyone else is outside drinking and eating, and you have to prepare for them. So you're like the other side of the coin. I don't know how to explain that, but it's hard. And on top of this, if you want to open your own restaurant, like your own activity, is even harder because the initial capital is very high. Like it's not something which is accessible to someone who is 25 years old. Like if you want to open your activity, you know that you have to be a subordinate worker first. You have to learn everything, go to school, do an apprenticeship, something like that. And then in the end, maybe later on in life, you can open your own place. It's not so easy to be part of it, of this industry, I think. And you really need to be very motivated because there's a lot of competition. Also because everybody knows how much this industry is growing and how much money you can make out of it if you take the right track. Like, for example, my boyfriend's bosses, they opened a very small takeaway restaurant and now they have five in like 8 years. So I think you have to take the right track. Yeah. They would also have more motivation maybe if this job had more stability. Like I think is also a responsibility of maybe the Italian government or the policymakers to make this job more attractive also for young people. Like if you give them more stability, better conditions, for sure they would love to do it. Like that's what we're all looking for, like a nice job in which we can also have fun, enjoy it, and a stability and good contract conditions.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And now, before we start closing things off, I really want to spend some good time talking about wine because, this is the Italian Wine Podcast and we've mentioned it here and there, but we haven't really delved into it. So, starting from Bologna, so what you've mentioned already. Firstly, as students, okay, throughout the day, you said there's usually the aperitivo, or on the weekends, there's some drinking involved. What kind of wines show up there? Maybe even at home, kind of like what you grew up with. If you want to start from there, like what did you see your family drinking? And once you were of age, like what were you drinking in terms of wine?
Have to confess, I'm not a huge fan of wines from Emilia Romagna. So I like other wines from other region more. But for example, my grandfather used to drink every day either Pignoletto or Merlot, which are quite typical from here, or at least a lot of people drink it. And when I was living in Forlì, which is a city close by for university, everybody was going crazy about Sangiovese, which is a red wine from Romagna, and Albana, which is a white wine. I remember all the students used to buy the same Albana wine every weekend. So yeah, there's a lot of passion about it. For me in particular, my favorite wine for Emilia Romagna, which is a bit my guilty pleasure, because I think you either love it or hate it. So it's Lambrusco, the king. You either love it like me, like, or you hate it because it's not easy. Like, it's the only sparkling red wine, and you serve it cold, which is not what you usually do with red wines. So I think people can not really appreciate it, but for me, like a platter of charcuterie and cheese and a good bottle of Lambrusco is like perfect, like heaven. I also had it yesterday, honestly.
Okay, that's your just like go-to aperitivo. Okay, and then we've looked at some Italian wines, and obviously, there's different foods you can pair with them. I don't know if you can mention a couple that you just mentioned now. So like the Sangiovese, Pignoletto, the Merlot, and kind of like what you've seen throughout our life that these are kind of like eaten with, whether it's local cuisine or, Italian cuisine in general, or even foreign cuisine.
Since we are born, I think we are told that like red wine goes with meat, white wine goes with fish. And now that I'm starting to approach the wine scene, I understand it. Like, it makes more sense because the red wines are normally they're tougher in your mouth. Like, you need something fat, and they clean this fat feeling from your mouth. While on the other side, white wines are more delicate with fish, which is a lighter flavor. So it makes sense. Of course, like all the people, they eat maybe pasta with meat and then a glass of red wine. Same thing with the second courses. And normally, like for what I've seen so far, for example, in celebrations, birthdays, weddings, stuff like that, we use prosecco to celebrate something. So you would use prosecco, for example, with a cake or with a dessert, also as an aperitivo. And then my other guilty pleasure is Moscato wine. I really love it because it's sweeter than the other ones. And the other pairing that I love is Moscato wine with the Tenerina, which is our chocolate cake from Bologna. Like, at all of my birthdays since I remember, like since maybe when I was 10 years old, I've been eating Tenerina with mascarpone cheese on the side and drinking Moscato wine for sure.
Oh, that sounds heavenly. That sounds so good. And now for our final question, just to close everything off. Since you've been, such a person that travels all over and tasted different cuisines and different wines, could you just tell us what's your favorite cuisine? I know it's hard to make you pick what's your favorite cuisine besides Italy, because we're just going to assume that Italy always stays on top. What's your favorite cuisine? Maybe your favorite dish from that cuisine? And what Italian wine would you pair with it? So, from the ones that you've mentioned, or maybe ones that you've been trying recently.
I think this question is very hard. Like, I love food, like any food, but I think maybe my choice would be food from like West Africa. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but for example, maffe or jollof rice or chicken yassa or plantain, fufu, it's all dishes from there, and I really love them because they're just easy. Like, it's what you would cook home. It gives me that traditional vibe. And among those, I think my favorite is chicken yassa. Or maybe fish yassa, like is rice with basically vegetables and fish on top. And as most of the African dishes, it takes like maybe 3, 4 hours to cook. Like anytime I have to cook it, it takes so long, and they say that like the guy, the people I work with at my volunteer work, like the refugees taught me how to cook it, and we used to cook it together. So maybe I also associate nice memories to it. And you have to put love in it. So I think this is what makes it special. And I would pair it with a white wine, as we said, because I'm a bit biased. Like if it's fish, for sure, it would be a white wine. And my favorite would be either Chardonnay, like from Piemonte, maybe Gewürztraminer. I really love the wines from like white wines from the north. This could be a good pairing, I think.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good, and I definitely need to try it now, and I hope you will cook it for me.
I will for sure. For sure.
Okay, so that's our time, Ludovica. This has been such a lovely catch up, such a lovely conversation about food, wine, living, and growing up in Bologna. We really covered all the bases, and we might have been a little bit over time as well. But it just shows that you have so much to talk about in terms of everything that we
It
mentioned.
was so nice. Thank you for inviting me. It was such a great opportunity.
Of course, I'm really happy you accepted, and I'm really happy we did this. Thank you very much to everyone for listening, coming along on this journey throughout Bologna, throughout different countries, throughout food and wine. And we'll hope to see you for the next episode of Next Generation on the Italian Wine Podcast. Ciao! Thanks for tuning in today for another episode of the Next Generation on the Italian Wine Podcast. See you for the next one. Chin chin!